Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your Audio Amigo, back with another Audio Amigo review for y'all. Waifus have been adorning the boxes of IEMs since the earliest days of Chi-Fi. But what happens when the waifu makes the jump from box art to faceplates? Well, you get the CVJ Neko, a limited edition single DD IEM priced at $70 US. Only 1,000 of these 3D reliefed waifu faceplate versions will be made, but are they worth picking up and adding to your collection? How do they even sound? Let's find out. As usual, we have my disclaimer. The Neko here was sent by CVJ themselves for review. I'm not being paid for this review, but because I could turn around and sell these if I wanted to, I've gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there's potential bias besides my own personal taste at play. Thank you to CVJ for sending these out, and thanks to all of you watching for your continued support. The unboxing experience here on the Neko is disappointing for a $70 set. You don't get a case, you don't get a carry pouch, which I feel like at this price point is a real head scratcher. What you do get in addition to the IEMs and the modular cable here is a single set of standard bore ear tips in a small, medium, and a large size arrangement. You also get a 4.4 millimeter adapter for said modular cable, and you get a keychain with the waifu on it. And that's it. This is frankly a little disappointing for $70 US. While a modular cable with 4.4 and 3.5 is nice to see, it's becoming a bit more common at this price point. And I don't know, it just feels odd considering how generous CVJ has historically been in terms of accessories with their IEMs. The Aria is $10 more than this and comes with a much more comprehensive accessories package. And I feel like most of the competition at least includes some form of hard carry case, which for something that has a sort of artsy shell that you're going to want to protect, doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Why wouldn't you include some sort of pouch or case to protect the finish? Fortunately, the included cable is fairly nice. It's a nice silvery sort of 4-wire braid that goes into a 2-wire twist at the Y-split. It does exhibit a little bit of memory, but it's really easy to just train out of by stretching out like that and just laying flat. It's not rubbery, it feels decent in the hands, it isn't microphonic at all. Overall, pretty solid. The amp connector here is CVJ's standard 5-pin modular connection. There's no sort of grip point here on this end, but it is a friction fit mechanism that uses 5 pins rather than the more traditional 4. You just line up that notch there with the dot there, and that's how you apply this. I do wish it was screw terminated. It does mean that that friction fit will eventually wear out, and you might find yourself pulling this part out, leaving this in your amp, especially if it's a bit heavier. Not awful though. Lots of other cables use this. The Y-split and chin slider are matching metal, and the chin slider works well as a little like ring arrangement, and most importantly, sits flush against the Y-split, which y'all know I like. No branding on either of these though. The ear hooks here are comfortable, and fortunately we get very clearly visible red and blue stereo indicator lines on both of them. Also things that I like, the sockets are slightly protruding in terms of the connectors here, but as you can see they sit perfectly flush, so these are a sort of recessed-ish socket for a recessed-ish connector. Overall, I would say, even though the cable is a little memory prone, I think it's perfectly at home on a $70 IEM, and I wouldn't feel bad having this cable on, say, a $100 IEM. The build here on the Neko is quite nice. You get these full metal shells with full metal faceplates. The shells themselves feel cast, and the nozzles are part of the lower shells here. You can see the traditional sort of CVJ like tri-lobe black filter there to protect from debris or moisture, along with 2 vents that seem to have dampening material inside them. You have one for the front volume of the driver, one for the rear volume of the driver. That for me meant no pressure buildup, no driver flex. Always nice to see on an IEM like this. Outside of that though, you can see there's no real acoustic features on the shell. You can see I have number 316 of their limited edition of 1000. You can see the seam between the sort of top half of the shell and the bottom half of the shell. The finish is also different. This is more polished, and this is more sort of like that cast look to it. The seam isn't prominent or uncomfortable, and there isn't really much else I can say. Slightly recessed 2-pin socket there, clearly visible stereo marking there. For what I would consider full metal shells, though, these are quite lightweight. Nothing that I think would impact their durability. It's just something that I noticed here. Scratching is a concern, but that's standard for most full metal shelled IEMs. So let's pull up the specs and see what makes the Neko tick. Inside the shells lies a single 10mm dynamic driver with a gold-plated dome and a polymer diaphragm surround. The single driver is pretty easy to drive. I didn't have any issues powering this with the Apple dongle or any of the sources that had a headphone jack. Shouldn't need to go out and buy one of these either, since the sound does not change with higher impedance sources or with impedance adapters. Again, always nice to see. I mentioned the weight just now. Now we can put a number on that. These are just under 6 grams a side, which is quite light, I feel, for full metal shells. The nozzles are under 6mm at their widest point, and overall the package is more compact than I was expecting. Yeah, I would say that in terms of specifications, this is just sort of your typical under $100 single DD set, like the Aria or the Titan S or any of the other sets in that price range. Just pretty typical in terms of specs. All right, here we go. It's time for the cool wall. And let's just say this is going to be a highly divisive faceplate. I, for one, don't mind the whole waifu aesthetic on box art or even faceplates for that matter. I've seen people get custom resin IEMs done with like Miku and Rin on them, or Rei and Asuka from Evangelion. Yeah, perfectly valid in my opinion. I wouldn't do it personally, but I think it works. Yeah, these, however, they're just not my style. The character is fine. The relief 3D technology that they sort of carved into these shells is pretty cool, like at a glance. It's clearly took a lot of work and a lot of, machine hours to try and carve all that out and get it painted and everything. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if the nose being that prominent on the relief, it certainly isn't that way on the box art. I don't know if it's as they intended or if it's sort of a consequence of the material they were working with. Yeah, this is essentially the major selling point of this set. It's the 3D relief art on the faceplates here. And for me personally, kind of like the ear acoustics, more jewelry style shells, I think if I ever wore these, I would look seriously uncool. So that's where these are going to go. They're going to go on uncool. I genuinely think that in terms of looks, the only people who will appreciate these are the people who really like the look of CVJ's Neko character. Sort of as a collector's piece to sit in like a display case or something, where you put them on display and just have them looked at. I hope they do a different design. There might be one in the works. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But don't take my word for it. Let's go ahead and check in with the Council of Ladies and see what they think of the Neko. And you know what? There you go. Only lady number 3 finds these pretty out of the whole group, and she's also the only one who would be willing to give out any comments or compliments for wearing these. So yeah, as I said, polarizing, but I'll say that the majority of the ladies leaned negative. Looking at their comments, it's pretty plain to me that these are just not to the taste of most of the ladies. Even lady number 3, who liked them, said that they were cute, but not necessarily to her tastes. CVJ are planning a release of these without the waifu faceplates, though, so I'll say go ahead and stay tuned to see if the sound, comfort, and everything else sort of stacks up in terms of price of admission for these, although I don't know if the new set is going to have the same tuning. We'll see. In terms of physical comfort, the inside of the Neko shells doesn't try anything crazy in terms of shape. There's no comfort wings or valleys or anything. It's just sort of your standard IEM shape with a plateau here on the inside for the driver. Yeah, in my ears, the lightweight of the shells combined with the standard nozzle size meant hours of comfortable listening, no real issues to report. In a similar way, my wife gave these a pass on the tiny ears test. She commented that while she would never actually wear these due to the faceplate design, she did find them overall comfortable in terms of fit and sort of wearability. She said she was able to form and maintain a seal with no real issues. Ear hooks mostly worked fine for her. So I'll say as far as the interior design goes, nice work, CVJ. They're pretty comfy. Let's talk about how the cat sounds. Kicking things off with the bass. The Neko is packing a pretty nice bass boost behind these shells. Yuki Chiba's Team Tomodachi rumbles nicely in the ears, and the higher frequency drops feel nice and impactful. The lower ones rumble nicely, as I said. I wouldn't call this a straight-up bass head presentation, but it is boosted to quite fun levels, and it tends to be a very dynamic presentation of low-frequency events. Kick drums and bass guitar also have a nice energy to them. Phil Collins's drums in Genesis's I Can't Dance, for example, they sound nice and impactful. There's nice thumpiness. You can hear the drum skin vibrating on some of them with the kick drum. It's what I expect to hear on this track. It's nothing overblown, but it is sort of nice and authoritative. I feel like this driver overall does well in the low frequency range. There's a nice texture to it, has good body. It's a nice, fun bass presentation with good punchiness and kick. While the bass is boosted, the mid-range is mostly tonally unbothered by that boost. The lower mids are a little bit warmed up, but not to the point where they feel heavy or thick. They just have a nice body to them. Motley Crue's Kickstart My Heart, for example, doesn't have any masking or clarity issues, even though it is a very busy track at moments with the kick drum hitting quite hard and the vocals and the distortion, sort of doing their thing. It all comes through relatively cleanly here, honestly. Female vocals, I feel, are also well represented. I listened to Connie Francis quite a bit after her passing recently, and her vocal performances came through well on the Neko. The drawn-out tones and more sonorous vocals in her rendition of Guaglione sound clean and tonally correct, with her voice rising above the instruments appropriately. The vocals aren't extremely forward or focused, but they also aren't pushed back or recessed either. I feel the replay of the track was quite good, along with the rest of the mids, honestly. For a more V-shaped sounding set, I think the mids are honestly pretty decent. Now we come to where I feel the focus of this set lies, that being the upper mids and treble. Female vocal harmonics here are borderline shouty, and for some listeners will come across as overblown and overly energetic. Minami's breaths into the mic, the sort of vocal cracking moments that she has in Kawaki wo Ameku, they have a lot of energy behind them in harmonic way. And while they add a good sense of depth and airiness to the vocals, they can also be energetic to the point where, as I said, some listeners will definitely find them shouty. For me, that wasn't necessarily the case, and I think that even her S and T tones were just on the safe side of sibilance. But for other listeners who are more sensitive to that sort of thing, I can definitely see how you would find this presentation fatiguing. The same thing applies to the treble. Frank Zappa's Nanook Rubs It has a really fun, energetic sort of sound effecty cymbal presentation with close to the mic vocals for him and his backing vocals. Just fun brass all over this track, honestly. All of that throws off harmonics that can be quite fatiguing here. I did get some sibilance. It might have you reaching for the volume knob like I was doing. Just a little bit overcooked for my taste, a little bit over energetic. Can be fun and sparkly. If I had to nitpick, the decay and wash on some of those cymbals is a little bit faster than I was expecting. That might not be a complaint for you. You might enjoy that. A little bit lacking in airiness is all I'll say. Overall, I think that this is a very clearly bright-leaning set, and if you can handle it, it will give you a sort of sparkly, energetic, really fun tuning, but if you're more treble sensitive, this might be just a bit too much for you. I feel like technical performance is a pretty strong point for the Neko. The low-end details are well resolved by this driver, and the texture that it picks up helps with smaller details. For example, the sort of feel of the hands on the drum skins in D'Angelo's Unshaken, in addition to the sort of subtle vibrato that comes off of his vocal cords on his tones, it all is replayed very well here. Very rich tonality. I think it's really nice, honestly. As far as my typical Waltz for Debbie test goes, the Neko did nicely with a lot of the glassware hits and sort of noises, but not so well with the background conversation. This is fairly typical of brighter tuned V-shaped sets, so I don't blame it too much here. Overall, what I'll say is this is a strong performer compared to other sort of single DD sets in terms of technicalities. It doesn't quite reach the Simgot EA500LM, but it does outperform the EW200 Maze, at least in my opinion, which is a very, necessary bar to clear considering that set's 40, this set is 70. Stereo separation on the Neko I feel is also nice. I didn't get that sort of crushed in narrow feeling to the sound while listening to The Who's Baba O'Reilly. That has a pretty strong stereo image. The distance between the piano in the left ear and the drums and things in the right ear I felt was appropriate for a replay of that track. Overall pretty good. In terms of perceived 3D soundstage, the Neko will not hold back well-mastered tracks, but it also won't elevate them. David Grisman's Doggy Mountain Breakdown has all the imaging that I needed to point out where the violin was, the banjo, the guitar, the mandolins, where they sort of all were around me. Nothing overall groundbreaking in terms of depth, but it's also not bad. I would say, compared to other $75, $70-ish IEMs sort of with a single DD, I'd say this is about average in terms of perceived soundstage and stereo separation. The Neko then. It feels like a pretty familiar tuning for CVJ fans. It's a brighter leaning V-shaped tuning with punchy mid-bass and a bit of shoutiness in the upper mids and treble. I feel like it will be a crowd-pleasing tuning for those who can handle it. I think it'll appeal to folks who like sort of sparkly, more vocal-focused sets. Like I said, provided they can stand the faceplates. I've gathered up some IEMs with similar-ish tuning, as well as some things that I think it competes with at this price point. So without further ado, let's get going. We'll start off with what to me is a relatively new face, the Tanchjim FiiO, priced at $70 US. These two are similar in that they both come with, frankly, disappointing accessories package, but at least the FiiO gives you a carry pouch. In terms of tuning, the FiiO lets you sort of dial in your bass level using that dial, but in its default atmosphere setting, it resembles a more balanced, less shouty, a little bit airier version of the Neko here. The FiiO rumbles a little bit nicer in the sub bass, the mids are a little bit less recessed, and it's got a little bit more airiness over the top as well, so if you perceive detail in that area, this will come across as more detailed to you. The Neko is more excitable with those female vocals, and it packs some more sparkle with the cymbals and instrument harmonics. If you're not sensitive to shout or lower treble spiciness, I think that the Neko will be the more exciting listen, but I would lean towards recommending the FiiO over this at this price point, especially if you're a little bit more treble sensitive. How about a family feud? Let's bring in the Qimeng Aria, priced $10 higher at $80 US. What does that extra $10 get you? Well, it gets you a hard carry case, a second set of ear tips, both of which come in cases rather than a plastic bag, 3 tuning nozzles to help you adjust the treble to your preferences, and a nicer modular cable. The other thing you get is a warmer, more mid-centric sound signature. The Aria is calmer in the upper mids and treble, even with the excitable nozzles, and it has a richer, less recessed mid-range. It pays for that by having a bit more tonal aberration in those lower mids and a much more subdued treble as a general rule. If you want a more straightforward V-shaped sound signature, I think there is value in saving the $10 and grabbing the Neko. On the other hand, if you want to control your treble presentation a little more, you prefer richer, thicker, lower mids, you want something a bit more mid-centric, I think that the Aria and its nozzles are easily worth the extra $10 even before taking into account all the extra goodies in the package. But now let's bring in what I think is the Neko's inspiration in terms of tuning. It's the very popular Simgot EA500LM, priced at $90 US. I would say that the overall sound signature of these two is quite similar, to the point where I would call the Neko overall LM inspired at the very least. There are a couple of differences though. Personally speaking, I do feel like the LM is the more detailed and resolving set, or at least it has more air compared to the Neko. If you use the silver nozzles with the black O-rings here, the LM will match the levels of upper mids and lower treble excitement that the Neko has, but it's a little bit leaner and cleaner in the lower mids, making for a sort of cleaner overall replay. If, however, you equip the gold nozzles, you warm it up to match the Neko, giving it a bit of a richer, thicker tonality, which I prefer, and you do still keep the advantage in overall detail and resolution. It's also a little bit more palatable to me than the stock tuning, or than the only tuning on the Neko. Because of those nozzles, the 500LM is the more versatile set, and in my opinion, it does also have a better driver. It is, however, $20 more, so the Neko could be sort of a more budget-oriented option if you're okay giving up the little carry case that comes with the 500LM. Finally, let's bring out what is still my favorite CVJ IEM to date, their collaboration with Angel Ear's the Yukimi, priced at $180 US. In my review of the Yukimi, I mentioned that it was one of the only like $200-ish single DD sets that didn't have a sort of little sister. Well, now with the Neko, the Yukimi now has a little sister. The Yukimi essentially to me comes off as a cleaner, smoother, more resolving, airier, and overall more mature sounding set compared to the Neko. The Neko is still bright leaning, but it's also a little bit bassier, a little bit more energetic in certain areas, and a little less refined in the treble with certain cymbal or instrument harmonics. All of this is to be expected. The Yukimi is over twice the cost of the Neko, but it is nice to see that the Yukimi now has a little sister in the same brand. So if you are a CVJ fan and you were sort of hoping to get the Yukimi but a little bit tight on cash, Neko is an alternative. So let's wrap things up. In terms of the 3 CVJ sets here, the Neko sits appropriately in the middle in terms of tuning. It's not as warm or as mid-centric as the Aria, with any of its nozzles, actually. And while I would never describe the Neko as being warm, it is a warmer, sort of less refined, more fun version of the Yukimi. And that's how I would describe these three. If you've got a little bit more money to spend than 70, I do think the 500LM makes for a very compelling alternative with a little bit more versatility. It also comes with foams that you can stuff in the nozzles to tune it a bit more to your preference. It's more detailed, nicer accessories package, the whole 9 yards, honestly. Finally, if you only have $70 to spend, I would consider the FiiO. It's got that base style, you can tweak it to your liking, and while it's not as bright or excitable as the Neko, it is overall more balanced, and I think that the extra airiness provides it with a little bit of extra detail if you perceive detail up there. It also doesn't come with a proper carrying case, but at least you get a little condolence pouch in the box, let's say. But that's enough comparisons. Let's go ahead and pull up the Audio Amigo rating scale and see where the Neko is going to end up landing on it. The Neko is essentially a slightly warmer, slightly less detailed 500LM with less versatility for $20 less. That's not a bad stat line, especially if money is a bit tight for you. The biggest flies in the ointment here are going to be the disappointing accessories package and, yes, the design of the shell. For $70, the accessories on this set honestly belong on a $20 set or even a $15 set. No pouch, only one set of non-premium ear tips and a keychain that you may or may not want to use isn't exactly generous or comprehensive, especially since CVJ is known for doing comprehensive, generous accessories packages. As far as the shells go, again, let's be nice and just say that they aren't for everybody. CVJ does have what they are calling a youth edition of the Neko with just gold and silver shells coming out. But at the time of writing, I don't know if the tuning is going to be different from this waifu edition. I did ask them the question. They weren't very clear on it. So I can't say if it's going to be the same as this. With so many competitive sets in this price range, the like $75, $100 bracket is just crowded with good single DDs. I feel like it takes a little bit more than a nice driver and decent tuning to stand out here. And as a result, I'm going to be putting the Neko in the good tier. If the silver and gold version winds up being tuned identically with maybe a better accessories package, this might get bumped up a tier and I will revise it in an addendum video. But for now, I feel like good is an appropriate place to put this IEM. Time for the recommendation section, and honestly, for me, this is a super easy one. There is really only one type of person that I would recommend these to straight up, and that is someone who really likes the design of these faceplates. The sound is pretty good. The design overall, the shells is nice, the comfort is all there, but unless they release the youth edition with the same tuning, the only people who are going to end up buying these are folks who really love the little lady on the faceplates here. Fact of the matter is, the FiiO exists, as does the 500LM, and if this is the sort of tuning that you want, you can have it, but with a bit more versatility and without the potential social faux pas that is having to wear these IEMs in your ears. I did think CVJ did a good job tuning the Neko, and they picked a pretty decent driver as well. I really hope that the youth edition is basically just this exact same IEM with a hard carry case, maybe a second set of ear tips. Yeah, at the same price. I think that would be a more competitive, more compelling option to more buyers, and I could actually pitch it more seriously as a like budget 500LM replacement, if you will. But that's going to wrap up my review for the Neko here. Thanks again to CVJ for sending it out. I think these are still available. I don't think they've sold through the 1,000 that they're going to make of these on their store. So if you really like this lady here, go grab your set. Otherwise, I'm going to ask them, I think, for them to send me the youth edition just to see if it is a version of this just with more palatable faceplates for more people. So stay tuned to that. Coming up next is going to be Tangzu's another one of their flagships, the Tianpeng. So stay tuned to that. So far, it's shaping up to be a pretty interesting review. But for now, I just want to say thank you all so much for watching and for all your continued support. Really hope you enjoyed this video. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch y'all next time.